Hi, I'm Maeva, and this is Raising with the Village, a podcast where real parents share real stories so we can all feel a little bit more connected on this wild journey of raising children. Today's episode is one that I think so many parents will feel, even if they're not living it in exactly the same way. We're talking about what happens when your life doesn't fit into society's quote-unquote normal rhythm. When your work hours don't align with nursery drop-offs, bedtime routines, weekends, or even time as a couple. Hollie and her partner both work in hospitality, an industry that quite literally runs opposite to family life. Evenings, weekends, late nights, the very moments that are supposed to be family time, are often the one they're working. So, what does parenting look like when you're constantly passing each other? When your relationship can start to feel more like co-managing a household than actually being together? And when, from the outside, it can look like you're doing it all, but inside, it feels isolating, exhausting, and at times, just frankly quite lonely. In this conversation, Hollie opens up so honestly about the reality behind it all. The juggle, the emotional load, the quiet sacrifices, and the kind of exhaustion that isn't always visible nor understood. This is a really important one because it shines a light on a version of parenting we don't talk about enough. So, here's Hollie's story. Hi, how are you?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
I'm very good, thank you. All right, shall we start
We shall.
with quick introductions? Who are you?
My name's Hollie. Yeah.
Well, that's a good start.
Yeah, that's my name. I am Hollie.
I'm glad to know that. Okay.
Anything else you want to know?
No, well, I think we'll find out a lot more about you because today's conversation is going to be slightly different because we're going to be talking more about a lifestyle. Is that the right way to say it?
Yes, you could say lifestyle. I think it wasn't one I chose. When was it? No, it wasn't one I chose, really. But yes, a lifestyle, I suppose.
Or at least what your life looks like.
Yeah.
And probably other people's life, most likely.
Yeah.
But we'll be diving into that. Okay. And shall we put maybe one word just to help listeners understand what we're going to talk about? How would you describe your lifestyle with one word?
Oh, gosh. One word. Life in general or motherhood?
Oh. Which one do you
My
want?
life is happy. My life is fantastic. Motherhood can be lonely, probably. Lonely.
Okay.
I think it's probably a word to describe what we will be discussing today.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we'll keep that in mind. But yeah, today we'll be discussing your lifestyle because you're working in hospitality and so is your partner.
Mm-hmm.
And so we'll try and understand what it's like to be a parent when you're working in an environment that is sort of not in line with what society, the norm, in quotes, is for other families.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so shall we start at the very, 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 very beginning of the story? Because I've mentioned your partner. And shall we start with a bit of a love story? Do you want
It wasn't a love story. But
okay.
yes.
Then a not love story. Do you want to tell me?
It was not romantic. Yes, so we met at work, as a lot of people tend to do these days. We worked together in a restaurant in Soho in central London. I was kind of on the beginning of my management journey, as was Phil, actually. Well, I kind of thought he was kind of attractive, and that was that. I wasn't really interested in much else. And here we are 10 years later, 10 years later with a kid and a house and this lifestyle.
Okay. Well, so let's say then that it started with fun.
Yeah.
And it turned into proper family life.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
So we kind of, like I say, we met at work. We went out socially with the friends that we sort of surrounded ourselves with at work. I actually moved away. I moved to France. I actually told him that on our first date. I was like, in 3 months' time, I'm leaving the country and
Oh, wow.
probably don't plan to come back.
Oh. Where did you go to?
France.
Oh, but where?
Oh, sorry, Antibes. So I went to go work on a yacht.
Okay. Oh, tough life.
Yeah,
Oh,
it's
God.
hard. Yeah, it is a tough life. So
See, I know nothing.
taking hospitality to, this is the good thing with this industry is you can do anything anywhere, but the lifestyle still stays the same, doesn't it? So I went off and moved to France with the view of summers in the Med and winters in the Caribbean, and that was that. Hence why the relationship never really kicked off, never really kind of got started, to be honest. And then whilst I was away, we kept in touch and we tried to make long distance work, and I actually ended up coming back for him. So I guess that's the romance in the story is I left what was, theoretically my dream job to come back for this guy, and here we are. Yeah.
I'm loving that. So you come back to London, is that?
We were in London, yes. Yeah.
What happens at this point? You move in together, or at least you become an official couple?
So the funny story is actually he moved into my flat and started renting my flat that I was renting. So he was kind of subletting. And obviously when I came back, then I moved just back in, and it all happened very quickly, very early on in the relationship. I mean, at this point, it's probably like, 9 months. We were already living together, but it felt right and it felt natural. And yeah. And I guess when something is right,
I love that. And I'm also going to say a thing that he was being very clever. That was a man with a plan. He was like, oh, let me live here.
No, that was my suggestion, actually.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I was the one that suggested that he was renting, an unaffordable flat elsewhere in London, North London somewhere. And I said, well, look, save yourself some money and, move back into where I was and kind of do us both a favour kind of thing. But like I said, I had no intention of the relationship being serious. I may have come back at some point, but I never really saw it obviously turning into what it is now.
And so let's move forward a little bit. When the relationship does become a bit more serious,
Mm-hmm.
At what point do you start talking about potentially having kids together?
So I think early, I've always wanted to settle down and have a family and, have a kid, get married. Before being with him, I was in a long-term relationship for 7 or so years with someone who I thought, in hindsight, first love, but, I kind of thought I wanted to settle down with that person. So that's always been on my radar to settle down, get married, have a kid, or have a family. We'd then moved into another property in North London together. This was our first, proper living arrangement rather than just kind of like, saving each other some pennies in the rent. So we moved in together in a really nice flat in Islington. And then we'd been there probably about a year or 18 months. Like our relationship was like really off to a good sort of solid start. I was like, this is, a solid long-term relationship, and, I'm with someone that I love very much, and, with my best friend, and we were traveling together and we were doing all sorts of stuff and we were still working together. Our careers were growing together. Then the pandemic hit. I think before the pandemic, I had sort of said a few times, I'd really like to think about getting married. Is that on your cards? I'd really like to have a family. I think family was always on the cards. He's from a fairly big family. He's one of 4. But marriage was never really sort of like, I think probably with most men these days, marriage is never really a necessity. Whereas I think a lot of women still like the security of, getting married and whatnot. But he said a couple of times, I don't feel quite ready yet. I was like, okay, I respect that. I have always had in the back of my head, I never wanted to raise a family in London. I never wanted to get married in London, never wanted to own property in London. Coming from the South Coast, I grew up on the beach, and for me, that was where I wanted to raise a family. And that was, I wanted my kids to have the lifestyle I had growing up, sun, sea, and salt air, But I never really saw myself actually moving back home because career-wise, options are limited, very limited, salaries are very limited. So for my career, I obviously had to stay in London. Yeah, so basically neither of us were ready. Then the pandemic hit. Obviously the hospitality industry got wiped clean. Phil lost his job. I was put on furlough. Obviously, absolutely no certainty of where our industry was going or what was happening next. In my particular restaurant, we were not a restaurant that was allowed to stay open. Well, we chose not to stay open. We actually, it was in Canary Wharf, and obviously no one was in the offices in Canary Wharf, were they? They were all working from home, and and offices were completely shut down in that area. So business for us was non-existent. There were obviously other restaurants and other companies that managed to stay afloat, and they were doing their, delivery services or, outside dining or whatever it was they were doing. But for me personally, that was a real struggle. Like I say, Phil lost his job during the pandemic. He was finding odd work in warehouses, stacking shelves. He did a couple of shifts in like a Chinese supermarket. He did, what else did he do? Delivery driver for, maybe it was Amazon or something like that, for like a week or something. Literally any job that an agency could find him, he would do. Then eventually his brother-in-law managed to take him on board as like a sort of he's basically a builder, and he offered Phil more permanent work and more reliable work during sort of the second half of the pandemic, which kept our income flowing. We had the discussion during the pandemic, we've got nothing else better to do, should we just have a kid? And the reality was it was impossible. We were, like I say, we were living in Islington, in a fairly expensive area, in a fairly expensive flat with no jobs, at the end of the day. And it was scary. It was a very scary time. And whilst we had nothing to do and other people were having families and making babies and whatever, that was the last thing and probably one of the most irresponsible things we could have thought of. But we did start to have the discussion. At that point I was 32, 33 possibly, quite aware of my body clock. And also I was quite acutely aware that my mum struggled to have me. It took her 7 years. It took my mum and my dad 7 years to have me. So with all of this in mind, I was like, we need to start at least action planning, what our plans are. And, when this whole sort of pandemic is over, what's next for us? Where are we? Where's our relationship at? Where do we want to be? Literally, where do we want to live and where do we want to be in our relationship? So we did start to discuss it. We did, towards the end of the pandemic, start trying informally. I came off contraception. Ultimately, we chose having a kid over getting married and, other sort of life commitments, because I didn't, if it was going to take us, say, 7 years as well to have a kid, I didn't want to, I wanted to get the ball rolling quickly or quicker. So towards the end of the pandemic, so 2020, we started trying, nothing was really happening. I did start going to go and get some tests, sort of fairly informal tests, just to sort of see where I was at. And actually on one of the days that I was supposed to, about a week before I was supposed to have a particular test, can't remember what test it was, I actually found out I was pregnant. And that was about a year later. So it took about a year. But I think the reason that we didn't have any luck conceiving in the beginning was probably the stress of the pandemic. We were still in and out of work. Luckily, Phil managed to land a really good job, which is where he's still at now. And I went back to my job. I think that kind of brings us to kind of where we're at now and how we spoke about having kids before we got pregnant, I suppose.
Yeah. And so with obviously the nature of your jobs, so the both of you working in hospitality, was that ever a concern? Is that ever a discussion you've had to think, what is that going to look like once we have a child, considering we are working different hours to what society expects?
Deems normal, yeah. Was it a conversation that we'd had? I think, you know what? So I've actually been in this industry my whole life. My first job was, probably waiting tables in a local cafe back home. Phil actually came to hospitality much later, especially London hospitality. I'd been in London probably about 8 years before he came. I think when you work in this industry, how can I say it? You just know what it's like, and everyone around you that also works in the industry just knows what it's like. And it's not that it's not discussed, you just get on with it, right? You know the shit that you're going to get thrown, whether it's the workload, whether it's, busy services, whether it's the unsociable hours or, the lack of support or whatever. I don't think it's really a conversation that we ever had. We just knew, I think is probably the best way to describe it.
So you just went in knowingly, and you had some families around you that were working in hospitality as well and had children and were making it work?
No, well, this is the thing. This is what you would think, right? When have you ever seen an old person working in a restaurant or in a bar, especially in London? Right? It's very much a young person's industry. A lot of people from overseas, a lot of people from Europe who pass through on their way to the next destination, or people that are starting out the careers, and this is another thing, like it is a career choice. I think in this country, working in hospitality is very much frowned upon. The amount of times I've been sort of, asked by family members, so when are you going to get a real job? Or, you've got a degree, you're going to be wasting your degree by working in restaurants. Or I wish people actually would respect it, see the industry for the skill and for the dedication, for the passion that people put into it. I mean, everyone knows that chefs are passionate and whatever, but it's the same for front of house staff as well, like the passion that people bring to this industry, like, is what makes it like special. And I'm a firm believer that everyone should work in hospitality at one point in their life, regardless, of their beliefs. I think it's a wonderful industry and I think it's fascinating. And some of the most incredible people I have met have been working in this role, in this job. So anyway, yes, not in this industry. It is a young person's industry. And now I'm 38 next month. Now I see why. It is impossible. My body doesn't work like it used to. My stamina isn't what it used to be. When I was younger, I used to work until 11, 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock in the morning, and then go out and party until, the sun came up, and then get back into work for, breakfast the next day or lunch the next day or whatever. And damn me if I'm doing that these days. Like, it's impossible. It's physically impossible, whether I was a mother or not. Like, I like my bed now at 10 p.m. and that's fine. Thank you very much. So no, there are people in the industry that have kids, mostly men, dare I say, because it's okay for men to have a career and have a family. It's not quite the same for women to have a career and have a family, right? Especially when you're working in an operational industry like this, it is impossible to, I did it for 2 years, the first 2 years of my son's life, simply because I couldn't get the job I wanted to get in HR. I went back to operations, not at a manager level because I simply did not have the capacity to do it. I went back for 2 years as a waiter in a restaurant, A, to pay the bills, and B, to feel like I had a purpose and to keep to keep it fresh, so I didn't lose too much of what was happening and the changes and, the sort of stuff that goes on in this industry, which is very fast moving, obviously. And there was a couple of us actually that I worked with who did have kids, young kids, doing the exact same thing that I was doing because it was the only option. A colleague of mine actually was a manager as well. I don't think she was quite as senior as me in her, pre-baby life. But still, she was of managerial level, and she also decided she couldn't go back to being a manager for the exact same reason, because you can't do it all. So when it comes to sort of having role models in the industry, no, there are none. They're all men. The men generally tend to be in very senior positions, operations directors or general managers or something like that. Generally command their own rota or their own schedule. And ultimately leave the wife at home to look after the kids, assumably. I don't know, that may not be the case for everybody, but it is a lot easier for men to have careers in this industry than women. Being a female manager in this industry is a bit of a rarity. To also be British and be a female manager in this industry is even more of a rarity. No, there are no role models. There's no role models. There's no one that you can use as an example. It's not that we decided that we were going to have a kid because other people were doing it or because so-and-so made it look easy or whatever. We just had a family and we had to do what we had to do, and you make it work, right?
So can you help me get an idea about what a typical week would have looked like for you in those first 2 years of your son's life?
So just to rewind a little bit, before I had, I was assistant general manager, so that's number 2 in a restaurant hierarchy. I had a general manager above me who was, oversaw the whole operation. I was his assistant, basically. So in terms of management, it's a fairly senior role, very stressful. I actually got dumped in charge when my general manager left, and I just found out I was pregnant. So for the first 3 months of my pregnancy, I'd been dumped in charge of this restaurant. My stress levels were sky high. How I managed to even stay pregnant, I've got no idea, if I'm completely honest. But I stayed because I wanted the maternity, pay, and I needed it, really. Because as we know, the hospitality is not a particularly well-paying industry. I didn't really have a choice. So that was pre-baby. I found myself pregnant. I found myself being left in charge of a restaurant for 3 months. And then I carried on the rest of my pregnancy working 48 hours a week. I worked up until I was 8 months pregnant. I was studying at the same time, studying for my HR qualification. And I was working until 2 o'clock in the morning on my feet for 12 hours a day, which seemed perfectly normal, but also completely ridiculous at the same time. Then I had my son. I chose to go back after 5 months. I remember a very good friend of mine who was the AGM of the restaurant, which I eventually ended up working at.
Sorry, what's AGM?
Assistant General Manager, sorry.
Thank you.
She was assistant general manager of the restaurant that I eventually ended up working at. It was coming up to Christmas. She was sat on my sofa and she was like, I can't find any damn staff. There's no one around. Everyone is incompetent. You think it's easy waiting tables. It is a skill, but it's amazing how many people can't do it. At the time, I was like, well, I'm losing my mind. I'd recently moved to, where we are now from Islington, so kind of fairly central London, all the way out here. Didn't know anyone. We just bought a flat that was crumbling around me, and it was going into winter. I was miserable as sin, absolutely miserable as sin. I just remember sitting in this flat and the walls were just caving in and cabin fever was hitting me hard. I had a 4-month-old baby. He was 4 months old when we moved. I'd been in this flat staring at the crumbling ceilings for about a month, and I was like, I can't do this anymore. I was quite literally losing my mind. And she said, I'm desperate to find staff. And I was like, well, I think I could probably do with the job. Phil was really struggling to support us with our new mortgage on his salary, which is a good salary. But suddenly you've got a child to pay for and a mortgage to pay for. And, one person sat on their ass, on maternity leave, earning, £170 a week or whatever it was, or a month, whatever. I can't even remember what it was now. I said, look, I'd happily help out temporarily. In my mind, I was going to be working there, get them through Christmas, come into sort of January, February, and I'd eventually get this HR job that I so desperately wanted, which then ultimately took me 2 years to get. So during that 2 years, I carried on doing the job I was doing. So my work week would look like I did breakfast shifts like 3 times. No, hang on. First of all, I started off part-time. The kid was still really young, and I was still breastfeeding exclusively as well. So I think I was doing 3 days a week. He was only in nursery twice a week at that time. We didn't have any other support, I don't seem to remember, until a little bit later on. So I was working 3 days a week. I was doing breakfast shifts. I think I did 2 breakfast shifts, which would also include lunch. So it's what your normal work day. I think I did 8 till 6, which is what you class as a breakfast shift. I was working 8 till 6, 2 days a week. And then I think I was doing 12 till 12 on the 3rd day. So I think I was probably doing about 30 hours in 3 days. I think it kind of equates to.
So on a week like that, when you're out all day for 2 days and half of the day, half of the night on your 3rd day, who's looking after your son?
So he was at nursery 2 days. I think he was at nursery on 2 of those days that I was working. And then Phil would have been the person that looked after him on his day off. So, which would allow me to go to work, basically.
So how do you do drop off? How do you do pick up?
So Phil would always do the drop off in the morning. And he, I think on those 2 days, did the pickup as well, because that was, so the way we worked, it was whilst the kid was at nursery, Phil would do his lunch shifts. So Phil has 3 shifts. He does lunch or double or dinner. So lunch for him is 10 until 5, 6 p.m., same as what I would kind of be doing. A double shift for him would be 10 until midnight, so he'd do 10 until close. And a dinner where he'd probably go in at, say, 3 o'clock and come home at close, which is, sort of midnight time. Anyway, the kid would go to nursery on the days that Phil would do the lunch shift, which would then allow me to do, say, a double at work, for example. If I'm completely honest, I can't really remember how we structured it because it's quite intricate in trying to keep all the plates spinning. You've got everything to think about. And obviously in this industry, it's very much business comes first. If Phil has someone that calls in sick, he's head chef. So who's going to be the one that picks up that shift? It's going to be him. And obviously as the breadwinner for the family, what he says kind of goes. So if he has to be called into work, I have to cancel my shift or I have to find an alternative solution. And there were times where he had to go into work. We had no other option for childcare and I had to cancel my shift, which means I then lose money. And I was obviously being paid by the hour. You don't get paid salary in this industry unless you're senior manager. So it's like a lose-lose situation, right?
You mentioned earlier that you were breastfeeding your son. How did that work?
Yeah, good question. Obviously, unlike probably most, modern, clean, corporate style buildings, we don't have additional facilities like, staff staff canteen or staff tree. I mean, look, it depends. Wherever you work, there's always something different. At this particular restaurant we worked at, you gotta remember that restaurants in London are built to serve people, not to serve staff. And if you think about a lot of the buildings that restaurants, especially maybe some of the higher end ones that I would always work in, they're in old listed buildings. There's not much space for extra space, shall we say. And space is money, right? You know, why would you, it sounds terrible, but why would you build a staff room when you could build 4 extra tables, you know? Which is terrible, so terrible. And I think that's changing. Welfare in hospitality is definitely improving in parts, post-pandemic especially, but ultimately the restaurant is built and the staff are thought about afterwards. It's like, oh crap, we haven't got a staff room. So I would go and sit in the toilet, which is also the changing room for the whole entire building, on a chair that was probably needed for a function, so someone might whip it out from underneath my bum. So I was either sat or standing with a breast pump on and a muslin cloth over my shoulders while someone stood next to me changing for their shift. There were times that I did it in the toilet, which is disgusting, you know, hygienically disgusting. Yeah, and I'd pump like a couple of times a shift, which also is really difficult because, you know, imagine you're in the middle of lunch service, you're doing 150 covers going into the busy Christmas period. You've got, you know, requests coming out of your ears and tables that are demanding, and you know, you want to make your tips, right? So you want to be there at all times. Then all of a sudden your boobs get hard and your milk comes in and you're like, crap, I need to leave the floor. You know, try explaining to your boss. I mean, luckily my boss is someone that I've worked with for many, many years, very understanding. And like I said, one of my best friends was, you know, also my boss. But even she never really got it. And now she is actually a mother herself. She actually turned around to me recently and was like, I wish I understood more. But anyway, that's another story. But yeah, imagine having to run off the restaurant floor when you've got, you know, hot food in your hand or drinks that need to be collecting or tables that are waving at you because they want service. And you're like, I just need to let my boobs down. You know, it's impossible. You feel like you're letting the team down. And then I used to get guys, some of the younger guys sort of saying, I heard them kind of bitching and moaning once, and Hollie's always leaving the floor. And obviously they don't know what I'm doing downstairs. Why should they? Why should they even care? But, you know, comments like that, it's like... And one day I think I actually turned around to them and said, you know what, I'm breastfeeding my child. I'm pumping downstairs. If you've got a problem with it, go and speak to my boss, you know. But it's embarrassing. It's embarrassing. It's awkward. It's uncomfortable. Like, it's impractical. That's it.
And so with what you've described, it really sounds like one of you, either yourself or your partner, is with your child at any given time. It doesn't really seem like you spend time with, you know, all 3 of you together.
No.
So am I right to think that it almost sounds like you are single in a couple?
Yeah.
You're a single mum and he's a single dad.
Yeah.
But you're part of a couple.
Yeah. Co-parenting. That's exactly right. So Phil would look after him on his days off and I would look after him on my days off. As he got older, we actually asked for support from Phil's mother. So she, up until, you know, even still now, does 1 day a week, which at the time wasn't really helping us in terms of getting our lives back together as a family, because I think she was doing one. So I would always do the weekends because it's the busiest time of the week. Phil needs to be in the restaurant. So weekends, I would always look after him. Phil would always do a Wednesday. Phil's mum would do a Monday, and he would be at nursery the other 3 days. So we do not have a family day, let me rephrase that. We did not have a family day up until very, very recently, which is now a Sunday for us. We have 1 day a week. Not every Sunday. It's not always guaranteed. again, business is business. If he's got something to do, or if he's got an event, or if he's got a busy lunch service or brunch service or whatever, he needs to be there. So, which is, it's great now that we can do that. But our kid's now 3.5. It's past the point of really needing it, you know? When he was much younger was when I needed that support and that co-parenting. And actually, it's just popped into my mind, in those early days when I first went back to work, I was doing Saturday, Sunday, Monday by myself. I did that probably for about 1.5 years. So 4 days of the week, 2 days of the week of the 4, Phil would be in the evenings 2 days. And he would be on double shifts for the other 2 days or something like that. And then I would be looking after the kid on Saturday, Sunday, Monday. And Saturday and Monday were always double shifts. And I think on a Sunday, he would normally do a lunch shift. So he'd be home at like 6, 7 o'clock. Come Monday, I was absolutely spent, completely overstimulated, exhausted. There were days I'd have panic attacks. There would be days that I would just be so completely overwhelmed. I think I suffer a little bit with ADHD. I've never been diagnosed, but I think I've got ADHD or some sort of neurodivergent mindset. So I get overstimulated very quickly. I worry. But not so much now, but back in those early days, I worried. You know what I worried about the most? Something going wrong. And there were a couple of times where I was soloing. One particular time, I had a stomach bug. I don't know what it was. I had all day. I didn't think it was much of a problem. I went out for a walk in the afternoon. I was so unwell. You know, I threw up on the side of the road. Some guy stopped in a car and asked if I was okay. I was pushing the buggy. I did not know what to do with myself. And I didn't really know I did know, the group of women who I met when I first moved to the area. But because of the shift work, I felt like it kind of stopped me really building close relationships, because I was never available to go out socially, or I was never available for play dates, or I was never available for this or that and the other. Or quite frankly, I was completely and utterly overstimulated. And I did, it's a bit of a catch-22, isn't it? You want the support and you want the help and you want to socialize and not be as lonely, but at the same time you're completely spent and overstimulated, and the last thing on my mind was to sort of pretend to be nice to somebody, because I just did not have it in me emotionally to be that person. So I kind of felt like I didn't have a huge community around me. And my parents live 3 hours away, and Phil's parents live an hour away. It's not exactly like they can just pop in the car and come and keep an eye on the kid whilst I'm unwell. There was a very kind mother, who may or may not be listening to this, who offered to come and help put my son to sleep whilst I basically had my head in the toilet. And I felt awful. I felt so ashamed and guilty, and I felt like a bit of a failure. I felt like, why can't I handle this? Why can't I be sick and be a mother at the same time? But I felt, it really sat sort of uncomfortably with me, and it will always stick in my mind. I think after that, it was like the fear of things going wrong. What if I got unwell, or what if I was unwell again? And how, if he, I don't know, had a temperature, or if he or I don't know, if he tripped over or hurt himself, or there was one time he cut his eyebrow open. Luckily Phil was home that evening, but what if he did it? Actually, he did do it. He tripped over and whacked his eye and cut his eye open as well. And Phil was on a double shift. I was like, do I go to hospital? Do I not? How do I get to hospital? The thought of putting a sick child in the back of the car and then having to drive there and not really being able to check on him and then having to worry about where to park or, all this sort of stuff, the logistics, right? You need two people for that kind of thing. And the thought of kind of doing that all solo, there were times where I would kind of work myself up into a bit of a panic. And obviously with the overstimulation of, doing 3 days solo by yourself was hard. And yeah, so we co-parent. It's difficult. Now we have a bit more of a healthy balance. Obviously he doesn't need as much attention as he did when he was younger. I don't need as much support as what I did when he was younger. And we do finally get that family day on a Sunday, which is not always a family day. It's often running errands or chores or catching up on things, But in the evenings, and this is something I really tried to discuss with family also, and also friends. I don't have a huge amount of friends that work in like a corporate industry. Generally, our friends are from the hospitality background because, you live, breathe and sleep work and, your social lives and are made at work and all sorts of stuff. I was trying to explain this to someone, like, it's become so lonely. The days, I guess, like when they're newborn and the days just seem never ending. But when they're a little bit older, it's just like what I would have given to have just Phil come home in the evening. And I tell you what, on those days, like a Sunday, for example, where he would do a lunch shift and he would come home, the pressure, like this invisible pressure that was released from me and my shoulders was lifted, knowing that at approximately 6 p.m. on that evening, he would be walking through the door. And it just made my day smoother. It made my day happier. Just knowing that you've got, like, whether he helped or not, physically, whether he helped or not, it was just knowing that someone was coming home and you were not alone. You were suddenly not alone anymore. And the days that he didn't come home and that he was on double shifts or whatever, I really wish that I could explain it. I cannot explain it. It created fear, it created anxiety, it created loneliness. Just because, if you've had a bad day, you just want to tell someone about it, right? You just want to, that pressure released. And that pressure release never came because he never walked through the door. And the loneliness was painful, like honestly painful. And I remember in the really early days, like the newborn days, I had to drag him home from work a couple of times because I cannot bloody do this. I cannot do this by myself. With a screaming baby, completely overstimulated. Yeah, it's just really, really hard. And I just wish, I'm probably not doing a very good job of explaining it, to be honest, but I really wish that more people understood, and then you'd get people say like, well, so-and-so's, my other half's not home until like 8 p.m. at night, but at least they're coming home, right? Phil would not come home until 1, sometimes maybe 2 o'clock in the morning if he'd miss his bus or train. I would be obviously fast asleep. I say fast asleep, there's only so much fast asleep you can be with a young baby, but I would be, at least those other people had the invisible pressure released when their husband or partner walked through the door. I never got that. I never had that satisfaction. I never had that. Yeah, I never had that. And it was really, really hard.
What about your relationship? Because obviously, just now, I think you were talking about you as a mum and him as a dad. But what about your relationship for the two of you?
there was a lot, especially in the early days, there was a lot of resentment from me. And I think the thing to remember in hospitality, which people may or may not know, is your average work week is 48 to 50 hours a week. That is a whole entire day extra of work than your average person that works 40 hours a week. So there's only so many hours in a day, right? And there's only so many hours in a week. So where the hell do those 8 to 10 extra hours, where do you put them? Right? So when he comes home from work, even now, maybe not so much now, because I think we've got a good balance going on, but in the early days, he'd be coming home from work absolutely exhausted. He's on his feet all day. His particular restaurant does 1,000 covers a day. A very busy central London restaurant, in a prime sort of tourist spot and a prime sort of tourist location. He's absolutely drained. So when he comes home from work, all he wants to do is crash. He would obviously spend a lot of time on his phone, just to kind of like unwind, or he would just go straight to bed and fall asleep, which I've never blamed him for, but I have resented it, because I'm also exhausted and overstimulated, and my brain hurts because I've overthought everything all day for the whole day, and I'm lonely and I need emotional support, and my love language is touch, and I'd like to be touched, and I'd like to be, just, I'd like to be supported in emotionally and physically. And I wasn't getting that at all. There were times over the last 3 years, there have been many times I've questioned, have we done the right thing? Have I made the right decision? Have I chosen the right person? I have, by the way. But, especially in the early days when you don't know your arse from your elbow, some really dark thoughts popped into my head. Really dark thoughts. Was having a kid a mistake? Am I with the right person? There were even times I thought, I wish I didn't do this. Horrible, dark thoughts. And I hope that never feels that he was not wanted, because he was very much wanted. But I think the reality of new motherhood for anyone is a lot. And to be in this industry and be a new mother is near on impossible. So our relationship suffered big time. Sometimes it still suffers now. Sometimes I get so upset, so frustrated. There's things we want to do. We had a family day the other day, and he wanted to do everything, but he wanted to, relax and unwind because he'd had a busy week. And I'm like crying out for family time. And we've got, the kids kind of around my feet and desperate to go out. And I told him that we'd have family day. And obviously he's then upset because we didn't have a family day. And, but it's really difficult to get angry when this is the lifestyle that we ultimately chose. These are the careers we chose, which I think is great when you're young, but it's not great when you're older and suddenly life happens and families happen and, stuff like that. But yeah, it's hard on a relationship. The additional pressures that it puts on a couple in this industry is monumental, and you will never ever understand unless you work in it. Newborn baby in a relationship, yes, that already brings added pressure and stress to the relationship and to the dynamic of the couple. To add shift work, loneliness, exhaustion on top of that, I don't know how we've managed to do it for so long. I don't know how other people do it. I don't know. Maybe we're extra sensitive. Maybe I'm extra sensitive. I don't know. But yeah, we make it work. I feel like we've got a good balance now. I feel like maybe it's because he's a little bit older and, I worry less. But yeah, it's been crap.
With
really crap.
Well, on this great word, it's been crap. With what you've learned,
Mm,
if you could travel back in time
yeah.
and meet Holly from a few years ago, what would you say to her? Anything you could say to her to help her prepare mentally, maybe for what's to come, to help her find maybe her support, a village quicker? What would you say to her?
I think the first thing I would say was reconsider your life choices and your career choices. Hospitality is not a career choice that you choose. I think hospitality is a career choice that chooses you. Someone once told me, someone once asked me, in fact, did you choose hospitality or hospitality chose you? And I think if you ask the same question to 90% of the people, to anyone that works in hospitality, 90% of the people would probably say hospitality chose me. I didn't wake up one morning and think I want to wait tables for the rest of my life. But when you're young, you don't care, right? You want to go travel the world. You want to have fun. You want to work in this industry. It's fun. It's exciting. It's, everything you want it to be. You don't think about later on in life. And then suddenly you've spent your whole entire career in hospitality. You don't know anything else. You potentially have to retrain, which is what I did, trained in HR. I wish I'd thought more about it. I wish I'd thought more about when I left uni, actually getting a more sustainable career. But then, look, that's life, isn't it? You never know where life's going to lead you. I didn't foresee myself moving into HR, but I do now. I am now. I still work in hospitality. I'm just not operational, which is a blessing. And I actually have wonderful flexibility and a wonderful boss who allows me to kind of come and go as I please. And I mean, the right job really does come along at the right time. Like, it took me 2 years to get, but Christ, I feel like the luckiest person on the planet. What else would I say to myself? I don't know. Like, maybe I underestimated the value of the village. I think, like, I'm grateful. So when I first moved here, like I said, my son was 4 months old. I didn't know anybody in the area. I went to the local library and I asked, do you know of any mum groups or communities that happen, or classes or anything? And, recommended I go down to the children's centre and find out some stuff there, which I did. And then I met a group of mums through baby sensory class who, quite honestly, have been absolutely fantastic in this last, 5 years. I think I haven't been as engaged as I could or should have been, for all of the reasons I've explained already. If it's not exhaustion, it's overstimulation, or just simply can't because, of the other half shift work, shift patterns, or my shift patterns, when I was, again, waiting tables and being operational, I couldn't go for dinner if I was serving dinner myself, to other people. Could I have found a group sooner? No, I don't think so. We bought our flat when I was pregnant. We moved in when he was 4 months old. I had to start afresh here. I think what I found very early, actually. No, I don't think anything could have prepared me for the loneliness. I think I knew it was coming. I don't think I really expected it to be as heavy as it is. Like I say, that invisible weight that gets lifted when your partner comes home at night. And I can quite honestly say to anybody that has their partners home in the evening, you do not realize how lucky you are. Even if you don't talk to them, or even if you don't, pay any attention to each other, just having that presence in the room, you don't know how lucky you are. And what I would give to have my partner home every night of the week, like a, in brackets, normal family, and had to have weekends off, like what I would give to have a weekend with my family. Saturdays still remain to be the loneliest day of the week. And this is the thing, and it's something I actually wanted to mention. It hasn't kind of come up in conversation yet, but I remember putting out on sort of our mum group for a while, sort of, if anyone's free on a Saturday, just let me know. No one came back to me. And you know why no one came back to me? Because on Saturdays, everyone does everything with their families. You know, everyone has got family plans, or they're going out for the day, or that's their time with their family. And I respect that. So, of course, no one's going to want to spend time with me and my family, or me and my son, because they've already got plans of their own. And obviously, their family is important. Their family time is important. So, Saturday still remains to be like the loneliest day, because it's, yeah, that's exactly why. It's a long day. Phil works a double shift. I go to football in the morning, and I spend the rest of the day trying to figure out what the hell to do with ourselves. Like I say, it's a lot easier now that he's older. I can take him for a walk or do this or do that, or, you know. But in those first couple of years, especially come winter, I mean, miserable, completely miserable. And trying to entertain a child whilst you're absolutely miserable yourself. You're supposed to be the happy one, and you're supposed to be the fun one, and, you know. And all you can think of is all of the people that you know that are enjoying time with their families and, you know, enjoying their young children and, you know, doing things with their partners. Yeah.
Is there anything else that you not just want to share, but that you feel people should know about what it's like to work in shift life? Or, you know, because here I'm thinking it's not just hospitality. We're talking about probably a lot of people that are working in non-traditional hours. So that could be obviously hospitality, like we've talked about today, but that could be also medical, that could be retail, that could be emergency services. It could be a very wide variety of professions. Is there anything else that you haven't shared yet that you feel people should know just for the next time that they bump into that sort of solo mum or solo dad that is part of a couple but is living a different life, a very different life to the rest of us?
I don't know. It's difficult to say. I mean, yes, you're completely right. It's not just hospitality. I am just one of many. I am one of many. I am one of many work widows. And my partner is one of many working dads that work shift work, you know, like you say, it's medical emergency services, you know, there's so many different industries. I don't know what else to say to anybody. I honestly don't know what else to say other than, I mean, the obvious is, you know, you're not alone, because there are so many other people going through the same thing as you. Can what I say make that better for somebody else? No, because it's still going to be lonely. They're still going to need to find what works for them. They're still going to need to probably find, you know, activities to do, or, you know, find ways to handle the loneliness, as it were. You know, but also the thing that we are unlucky with is we don't have family nearby. You know, other people that do work shift work may well have family nearby, which is great. Good for them. So look, everyone does their own thing and everyone figures it out their own way. And as I mentioned before, I think I possibly struggle more than perhaps your average mother. Whether that's because I have undiagnosed ADHD or, you know, whatever it is. I am acutely aware of that. I am acutely aware that I'm probably oversensitive, overstimulated, and over-worried than your average person, which also doesn't help. But no, I honestly don't know what else to say other than, like, keep going. Like, it does get better. I think be patient with yourself and be patient with each other, because the amount of times that I've lost my rag at Phil, I wouldn't say I've threatened leave. I don't think I ever could leave. I wouldn't say I've threatened leaving, but, you know, just to, like, I've said some really horrible things just to try and help him understand from my perspective what it's like to be at home with a newborn baby or a young baby by yourself with no one around. Yeah, I don't know. I honestly don't know what else to say. You know, it's tough. It's really tough. I guess the only thing is find your group, find your village. You kind of, there's this funny thing, find your village when you're pregnant. And it's like, that village doesn't exist as it used to. I think we like to think it does. And, we might meet women and we might meet people that support us through those early days, but it's not the village that it used to be. And it's not the village that we all need. Life has changed. Work has changed. First of all, majority of us are working mums these days. So, you're expected to work like you don't have kids and have kids like you don't need a job, and the system is not working for us, quite frankly. And that's a whole other subject for a whole other day, I'm sure. But the system is not working for us. And as a result of that, the village is non-existent. So I think if you are in a similar situation, reach out where you can. People will help you. Like, honestly, a couple of occasions, people have come to my rescue in the first couple of years, whether necessary or not. But, I've been grateful either way. Maybe I should have asked more. Maybe I should have asked for more help. Maybe I should have asked for more company. Maybe I should have made more of an effort. But like I said, when you're overstimulated and you're tapped out and, the last thing you want to do is try and socialize with people, It's hard. It's really hard.
I just wanted to say thank you very much for sharing your story.
Thank you for having me. I feel it's a subject I'm really passionate about because I feel like I've suffered in silence for a really long time. And I feel that it is important. I think, there have been, like I said, there have been times where people haven't understood, or people have, tried to kind of cover it up with, but this and but that, and, never mind. And it's like, no, it's a real problem. It's a real problem. So I really hope that people do kind of understand a little bit more now.
Well, thank you. I think you've started to help everyone. So thank you for that, Hollie.
Thank you very much.
If I can share a joke, I was thinking originally to have a couple interview with you and your partner.
Oh my God, that would have been hilarious. Why didn't you do that? We should have done that.
Well, I'm very happy to do it. It's just I was thinking,
that's hilarious.
How could that happen?
Well, that is, yes. If we're talking about shift work, when would that happen? Exactly. We'd have baby in tow, a toddler in tow, and that would have been a great one. That would have been a really interesting one. I think Phil probably would have had a really interesting insight as well. And maybe we would have had conversations that we have not had yet, as a couple. I think that's really interesting.
Hey, maybe part 2.
Part 2, maybe I would be so up for it. Definitely.
Well, thank you so much for that, Hollie. And I'll speak to you very soon, and hopefully we'll have a part 2. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
What a powerful conversation. I found this episode such a learning experience, a real insight into a reality that many families may never have had to think about. And yet, for so many parents working in hospitality, healthcare, emergency services, shift work and beyond, this is everyday life. Hollie, thank you for taking us into your world with such honesty. Thank you for sharing not just the practical realities of parenting around non-traditional hours, but also the emotional side of it. The loneliness, the exhaustion, and the resilience it takes to keep showing up for your child, your relationship, and for yourself. There was so much in this conversation about invisible labor, about partnership, about sacrifice, and about redefining what family life can look like when it doesn't follow the standard script. And if this episode resonated with you, whether because you saw your own family reflected in it, or because it opened your eyes to a reality you had not considered before, I'd love for you to share it with someone who might need to hear it. As always, thank you so much for listening, for being part of The Village, and I'll see you in the next episode. Raising with The Village will now be released every other Thursday, giving me the space to keep bringing you thoughtful and honest conversations. You can find all past episodes on Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, YouTube, or wherever you usually listen. And you can follow the show there, so new episodes land straight into your feed. If you'd like to get in touch, share feedback, or suggest a story, you can find me on Instagram at Raising with the Village. I always love hearing from you. And if this podcast has resonated with you, one of the best ways to support it is by subscribing, rating, leaving a review, or sharing an episode with someone who might need it. It truly makes a difference and helps these stories reach the people who need them most. Thank you for being part of the village, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.